Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Welcome back, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. I heard you did great in doing this programming. I hope I didn't lose my job here.
There was a big hole here where you're supposed to be.
Well, anyway, we have something to discuss, and I think it's very worthwhile. The perceptions are that the American people and even the Republicans, all they want is more and more military spending, more militarism, and accommodate the military-industrial complex. Well, the University of Maryland did a study published just yesterday on The Hill newspaper, that is, and this a group from the University of Maryland, the program for public consultation, which is independent. They said nonpartisan and all this, and they went into 7 or 8 big states, including Florida and Texas and Maryland and Virginia, and did this. And they had 7,000 interviews to find out what the American people are thinking about more military spending, because the Republican candidates are gung-ho. Like, if you're not for more military spending, you're un-American, you're unpatriotic, you don't care about the world, you don't care about national security, and that the American people want this, they're terrified of ISIS, and therefore they are going to say, don't cut any, boost it. Well, it turned out it wasn't that way. I mean, I think there's some interesting statistics here that we want to go over, because I think they missed the whole point on this, because the one point that I constantly make is the title of the article was American voters would cut defense spending by at least $12 billion. And that terrifies some people, because the point is defense is legitimate. And sometimes you have a better defense when you spend less money and then quit meddling. But this said that they are at least for $12 billion out of the military, which is significantly different. So do you think this is significant? What can we get from this survey that might be positive?
Well, I think it's true that propaganda does work, and the media's bombarding people with fear stories does work. However, despite all of that, even though it may not be a significant amount, I think this really reveals that the American people are thinking very differently than the hawkish politicians when it comes to military spending. I think they're looking at these enormous budgets, and they're also looking at their own economy, and they're getting pretty worried, I think.
You know, there's been one boondoggle that we've been criticizing for a good while, and that's the F-35. And so the American people, they must be listening to our program, because they're not. The majority of the people thought they should cut the F-35.
Cut the F-35, cut one carrier.
You know,
and quite a few things.
And there's various things. They even wanted to cut naval things, but there was a couple things they didn't want to cut, which I found sort of interesting. They didn't want to cut the special forces, the Marines, which means that I think this approach and what we're seeing here is that people want to sort of tinker around the edges of cutting back. They did say that the survey reflected that the people were concerned about the deficit. And our debt is $19 trillion, and we're spending over $1 trillion a year on defending our country and national security. So even if they did pass $12 billion cuts, which won't happen, it's not much, but it's still encouraging that they didn't get sucked into saying that everybody wants to massively increase it. But which candidate is it that is calling for the most increase and doesn't seem to be doing well?
That's what's interesting. Rubio is the neocons' favorite. He's the one calling for the most increase in spending on the military. I wonder, is it a coincidence that his numbers are just tanking?
No, and here, even in Florida, and that to me is really significant. It may be that this issue isn't quite as big, or it also means that maybe the people were thinking more about the deficits and the debt than the Republicans give them credit for, because they're not. How many times are they arguing about how much are we going to cut spending? Yeah. There's never been a debate on that. They just say continue. And when I hear the leadership, congressional leadership, or any of the candidates, they talk about doing this and this and this. but they never really talk about cutting spending because I don't think they really worry about the deficit. They pretend, because most of the established Republicans might express concern, well, we need to cut Obamacare, it's all Obama's fault, but that's not a problem. But it's always, they preach the gospel that you have to increase the military spending because it's been gutted. And I don't think they have much proof that our military has been gutted.
Well, as you wrote in your column this week, U.S. spends more than the next 14 countries combined. It defends our wealthy allies. I did a little update. I do a weekly update at the Ron Paul Institute, and I quoted Ryan McMakin at Mises Institute. He said in the 8 Bush years, $4.7 trillion was spent on defense. Now coming through only 7 years in Obama, $5.3. So Obama spent more in 7 years than Bush did in 8. And yet the Republicans are saying he's gutted the military, he's destroyed the budget. So I think the people perhaps are paying some attention to this.
Sounds like a little inflation. Probably prices, the price of these weapons always goes up, but there's also, a net increase in weaponry too. But the American people are suggesting that we don't need it. But when they did this survey, they found out that the Democrats wanted to cut the most, which shouldn't surprise anybody. They were willing to cut it by $36 billion. So they had to average this. So it still doesn't apply strictly to the Republican primary, but it still is significant. But the independents want to cut $20 billion, and the Republicans want it to stay level, except, even that, isn't enough for the candidates. They need to demagogue it and all. But it means that the American people would listen to somebody with reason if they got up on that stage and said, really, just because you spend money in the military, you're not going to have more defense. It's sort of like just because you print more money, you're going to have a healthier economy. There's a problem out there, so we'll print more money. So there's a concern for our safety, and there should be. But it's always this technical changes, the minor changes, and the American people are concerned. They're concerned about the deficits, and they sort of lean toward, cutting back. We've been convinced this bomber's not worth it. It's a boondoggle. But at the same time, the problem is more strategic. It's more philosophic. It has to do with foreign policy. So I don't think you'll ever take care of any of our problems when they think that they can tinker around the edges and get a few more congressmen that will vote to cut. I don't believe for a minute there will ever be cuts, because we've had Republican conservatives in charge and Democrat liberals in charge and independents in charge, and it's always more and more and more. So the lobbyists are very powerful. They can overcome a sentiment that might be prevailing with the people, but then to change policy, that's a big job.
It is, and that one of the things that struck me too, and you mentioned it, is that the independents want to cut it by 20. So they're much higher than Republicans wanting to cut more. So that would strike me as that there's a good pool of voters out there for a candidate if they wanted to tap into it. And the Democrats do want to cut the most, and I would guess probably they'd rather have more of that for spending domestically. They'd rather have more programs and roads and welfare and things. Yeah. But you had an answer for that back when you were on the campaign trail.
Yeah, what I would say is, if they were going to work their way out, which I don't believe they ever will, and my approach was to get a net cut in spending. And even if it meant what some people might say, you're compromising or something. But if you could cut what I used as an example was building an embassy in Baghdad, $1 billion embassy in Baghdad. Don't build it. Save $1 billion and put half of it to the debt decrease in reality, and use half, because I can't help but have some empathy for children who've been raised in the entitlement system, totally dependent, and it's so distorted that if you did that and worked your way out of this and returned to sound economic policy, you could work your way out. It's not going to happen, but it is a vehicle where you could actually cut, but people would have to give up militarism. So this argument goes on and on. The Democrats want to save here, spend more on entitlements, and Republicans want to they say they will cut it someplace, but they certainly really want more military spending, so they won't even entertain, the change in the operation. But I think this study shows how really powerful the military-industrial complex is. The sentiment, in spite of all of this, the sentiment is at least neutral as far as. But so I'm sure a lot of people out there, when they cringe a little bit when they hear the Republicans saying, we have to rebuild the military. And I think they all say this. Well, and of course our point was, when was the military spending ruined or decreased? It never has been.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to overcome the perception that less spending on the military means less defense of the country, and that is a tough propaganda thing to get over. And it may just be that economic concerns at home will push things in our direction a bit more, and we can't complain too much about it. Although it would be better to have a philosophical victory.
Yeah, and with the scare tactics of using ISIS, which is a very serious problem, but you need to understand why they're there and why they are a threat to us, and they don't deal with that. But in spite of that, they weren't calling for more military spending. But a couple of things that they exempted, special ops and this sort of thing, and the Marines. I think what they're endorsing there is sort of a minor strategic war, because we don't like. It seems like the American people would accommodate for killing people overseas, because those Arabs and those Muslims, they're not people. They accommodate for that, but they don't want to see American soldiers killed, which is good. But maybe if we killed less of them, maybe we would have lost a lot less lives over here. But they right now are suggesting that the people there can continue to do this, but I don't think they can. I think what we have to do is change the policy in order to change things, and that's where the real conflict comes. But I think, when you take this, special ops and things, it's part of the group that believe in sanctions. Well, if we have sanctions, remember when we were in Washington, a lot of the progressive Democrats were with us on a lot of things, but they would not be for non-intervention, because they want to intervene on social, economic terms and export Keynesian type and deficit financing that we have. But that they would think that's going to save us from it. But trade wars. A couple candidates one in particular, love trade war. That's really, and even going back to wanting to start a trade war with Japan, and to have one with China, and we've said so many times, because it's been said for so many years, trade wars lead to hot wars, and that's why I think they're willing to do a little bit of that, and then that goes back to my argument, that the argument has to be philosophic and strategic, and talk about what our foreign relations should be. And of course they'll come down and say, well, sounds good, but you are an isolationist, and that doesn't work.
I wonder if some of the support for special forces and the Marines are usually the first to land, I wonder if some of that comes through popular culture, which depicts it as quick and secret, and they get things done easily. I think we can still even be encouraged by this, because it shows that there's a real popular concern about a full-on war. They'll do a little bit here and there, but they don't want a full-on war.
Yeah, and we have to admit things are bad right now, and they're using it, and we've been involved, and it's been worse this century than the last century. But think of our early century, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, and that was the original intent. So we must have, it was born into our system a lot more than we would like. But that doesn't mean that we should give up on it, because this is a principled stand, and something has to give. We can't continue to do this, and if it leads, as I believe, to a bankruptcy in this country and a cataclysmic end to our current system, like it was to communist system, then we have to think about something else. And that, of course, is the reason why I think a even more principled stand for the cause of liberty in the 21st century has such a much greater advantage than even it did at the founders of this country. You know, when I think back about reading about Adam Smith was a great economist, but he still didn't have it right yet, you know, and there were a lot of things. And I don't think originally our country had it right on foreign policy, even though they said great things, non-entangling alliances, you know, and trade with people and this sort of thing. Then immediately there's another group that is always competing with that, and that competition is going. But I suspect it's getting to the end where a push comes to shove and somebody's going to suffer. And if we'd wise up, I don't think the poor would have to get poorer. Matter of fact, the wealth would be distributed much differently in a free society if we didn't have a Federal Reserve that protects the very wealthy.
Well, I think we can still, we're a lot of doom and gloom on the show. I think we can embrace and revel in this good news story for a little while.
Right. I think it's sort of great that the statistics out there, when you check with the American people, don't endorse the politicians who's yelling and screaming to rebuild the military, and the American people don't even believe it, and that they could do with less of these weaponry. So this is good, and I think there's a further understanding. I would like to make it much clearer that tinkering on the edges won't be the solution, but it's good that we're moving in that direction. And the only thing that will do is if we have a principled stand, not only on economic policy and freedom and tariffs and monetary policy, but on foreign policy as well, because they're intertwined, they're connected together. You can't even talk about a foreign policy and fighting wars if you don't look at it about the economic cost and the cost to our personal liberties, because that is, under these conditions of wars, when then the greatest threat comes internally. And just look at the last 15 years since we've had this war going on in the Middle East and a war against Islam. And the civil liberties in this country are continued to be eroded. So once again, it's a principled stand for the cause of liberty and seeing people as individuals and not as groups, and seeing people as individuals where they get to spend their own money, and markets are important, and no fraud and no counterfeiting in currencies. So the founders gave us a lot to think about, and they were on the right track. Well, I'm convinced that we can refine those viewpoints and make it even a much better principled stand for the cause of liberty. That, of course, is my hope and prayer. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.